Hey, welcome to the Simple Nutrition Podcast, a show that helps you learn practical and actual nutrition tips from an expert. I am your host, Leonila Campos, a registered dietitian with over 8 years of experience in the nutrition field. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Simple Nutrition Insights Podcast. I am your host, Leonila Campos, registered dietitian, and I am super excited for today's episode. I have a special guest with me, Melissa, and today we're going to talk about practicing self-compassion for long-lasting weight loss. It's so important, so we're definitely going to dig deep into that. But before we start, let me tell you a little bit about Melissa. Melissa is also a registered dietitian nutritionist, weight loss specialist, and expert health writer with over 18 years of experience in the health and wellness industry. She owns Metri Nutrition, a virtual private practice helping women achieve sustainable weight loss. Melissa is a freelance writer for major media outlets and wellness brands and is a sought-after speaker on weight management topics. Melissa believes everyone has the power to improve their health, one small habit at a time. I really like that. It is absolutely true. Her approach to healthy eating focuses on what to eat more of for better health versus what to restrict or eliminate in the diet. Melissa lives in Connecticut with her husband and 2 boys, where she enjoys training for half marathons, reading, and traveling with her family. Awesome. Well, welcome, Melissa, to our podcast. I am excited that you're here.
Thank you so much, Daniela, for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation today.
Yeah, and so I can relate. I also have 2 boys, and they definitely keep you busy.
Oh, yeah.
And on your toes.
Sure. Yes,
all the time.
For sure.
Nice. Okay, so I wanted to talk about this topic, right? Because I think it's interesting because I had a conversation this morning with another client, and we talked about how just the weight loss process, right, doesn't take into consideration or the factors of your emotions, right? And as you are progressing into this new person, this new you, there's a lot of emotions happening, right? Maybe possibly frustrations, but also wins. But oftentimes we don't know how to deal with all that. And so I think the self-compassion is so important. Let's start there, right? Maybe let's talk a little bit about why this is important.
Sure. Yes. So as you said, it's something that's not really the concept of self-compassion is something that we're not always talking about. We're thinking about just kind of going through the motions when it comes to weight management of, having a healthy diet and a lifestyle and all of those things that are, of course, needed, but really taking into account that we're all human and that as we go through the process of, trying to achieve better health, a healthier weight for ourselves, whatever that is for the person. There are those emotions that come up. There are the barriers and challenges that come up along the way. And those are the key times where it's really important to practice that self-compassion and not beat yourself up when things feel hard or when you feel like you're sort of falling off the wagon, that kind of common thing that a lot of our patients may say. And we just tend to be hard on ourselves, I think, as human beings. And I think it's just helpful to remember that we are human and that, when these things come up, there are kind of better strategies and ways to be more positive because I know I've seen in my experience with clients too, when a client is hard on themselves, it becomes a longer term setback versus, kind of brushing it off and saying, I'm just human, it happened, and kind of letting it roll off.
Right. Yeah, I love that. And I think it's as practitioners, right, being able to recognize that and support our patients that way, right? Like, yeah, you are human. And I attended a webinar that talked about self-compassion a little bit. And they mentioned that our biology and as humans, we're able to provide compassion to other people, right? Like if we see other people suffering, we lend a hand, right? We're compassionate, we feel empathy. But when it comes to self, right, ourselves, it's really hard to be like, why can I do that for myself? Right. And so on that, how would you describe self-compassion? Like, what does that really mean?
Yeah. So I think a really good way to explain or define self-compassion is really just in the context of all things, like we're talking more specifically today about the context of weight loss, but self-compassion is just being kind to yourself. It's really, treating yourself with care, the way that you would treat a good friend or family member. And so, as you said, unfortunately, we don't always naturally do this for various reasons, but it's really important. And especially in the context of weight loss, it's really about giving yourself grace when, you had a tough day or a day that you felt that you kind of slipped on your habits a little bit, because that's going to happen. I think knowing that that will happen, to really expect that, is really important in the context of self-compassion, because everyone has slip-ups. Everyone has days where it might feel a little bit harder, or they're in a situation that it feels harder to stick to healthy eating. And we can't control always everything around us either. And so, that's some of the strategies that us as dietitians help our clients with, of course, is navigating those situations. But the reality is that they're going to continue coming up. And if have a tough day or meal or time that you feel like you didn't follow or do the things that you wanted to do, just giving yourself that grace and saying to yourself, it's okay, I made this mistake. What can I do better next time? And thinking of it in a more positive way versus, saying something like, I did this and, I might as well just continue to follow these unhealthy habits for the rest of the day or week or however long it might end up being.
Right. Yeah, I think that is important to remember, right? That things are going to happen, right? Life is going to happen. As you mentioned, we are human. And I think just having that understanding, like, we're not perfect, right? And things are not always going to be perfect. It's okay that we're going to have some of these days, but how do we respond to that, right? And how do we move forward instead of like just staying behind and stuck just in those thoughts?
Right.
It's really good.
Is really, yes, for sure. And I think that, what we're talking about today can be especially helpful for those that tend to kind of have that all or nothing thinking, and kind of keeping that in mind for someone that often feels that, either they're eating really well or they're not, doing well at all. And that could be applied to diet, exercise, and all of those things. And so I think that it's helpful to keep that in mind if you are someone who's listening that struggles with that there are things that you can do to change that mindset, because that's really what's going to help you to continue to move forward, stay more consistent, and really be more kind to yourself.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And so what are some common signs that either maybe you know of, you've seen in your client, that shows that someone is being too self-critical in their weight loss journey, or just being harsh on themselves?
Yeah. So I think, the few examples would be kind of the self, it's almost like negative talk to yourself. So kind of the opposite of self-compassion. It's really the things that you're saying to yourself internally, or out loud to others. So for example, I'll give a few key examples that I often hear from clients. One is something like, I already ate too much today. I might as well, can I keep going? The day's already ruined. I already messed up. And so I might as well just keep going. This is a very common habit that I see in a lot of clients, that just think, they feel defeated and they might as well continue. And then also another sign is saying something or thinking, I already fell off my plan this weekend. Weekends could be a challenge, for example, for many people, and just feeling like they don't have what it takes to do this long term, and telling themselves like, I don't have the willpower, I don't have the ability to do this because of a slip up, whether it was one time or multiple times, kind of telling yourself that you don't feel like you're capable or kind of cut out to make these changes. And then lastly, saying something like, feeling like you have no self-control, like you don't have that willpower. What's wrong with me? Why can't I do this when other people are having success? And so those types of thoughts and words, the way that we word kind of the thoughts to ourselves really matters. And again, sometimes this may be, that's why it's important to talk about this. This may be things that are happening that a lot of people may not realize, and it might not be as sort of obvious as these sort of statements. But just as a few examples, kind of the most common that I see. And I think a lot of these can stem from, sort of social media and what we see other people doing, other people's successes as well. And I think keeping that in mind too, that sometimes this negative self-talk is stemming just from society kind of putting this pressure of like needing to be perfect. And that's not really the reality of what is needed.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that and just noting that sometimes society plays these I don't know, I don't even know the word, but expectations, right? Or like
Hmm.
this is what you should look like, or this is, if you're doing this is how you should end up, right?
Hmm.
And that is unrealistic, right? And definitely sometimes social media doesn't tell you the whole story.
Right.
People are probably struggling, doing that as well. And so I think also helping our patients and clients to understand like not everything that we see or read or hear in social media, right, is accurate. They probably
Hmm.
paint this picture, right? So you can just have this image in your mind, but in
Sure.
reality, it's probably completely different. And the other thing too that, or the follow-up question would be like, how do you help your clients manage these emotions, right? Or get through this negative self-talk?
Yeah. So I think the first step is really trying to, kind of dig a little bit deeper into why that's happening, where it's stemming from, and is the first step in figuring out, sometimes it may stem from, the person's childhood or their parents and kind of the words that they used and kind of what they're hearing around them, and kind of just challenging those thoughts with them and saying, do you really believe that? Or what is another way that you can put that to really just help to try to change their mindset? Because a lot of times it is a challenge because our mindset is sort of feels like it's ingrained in us and kind of just the way that it is. But the truth is that it could be changed and modified over time, kind of working through each time that we meet. Um, we always talk about, with my clients specifically, we talk about their wins first. So I think that is a really key component to focus on first and foremost, whether you're meeting with a registered dietitian or, talking to a good friend, and focusing on the positive, because there's always positive things happening, even if, for example, the scale is not moving in a given week. And I think that can help, as a person starts to see more of the positives that are happening. For example, they're getting better sleep, or they are in a better mood and maybe more patient with their spouse or their children. All of these things are signs of positive changes happening. And the more that a person sees that and recognizes it and writes it down to see it every day in and day out, then they're going to bring themselves back to that. And that could be really helpful to keep them in a more sort of consistent, positive mindset.
Yeah, I love that. I do the same thing with my clients, right? Like, let's start with the positives, right? The wins. What have been your
Right.
wins? And it's interesting because if something negative or challenging happened to them, and the rest of the week, right, or weeks were like so many wins, as humans, we focus on the negative, right? On like, oh, that was a challenge. And so sometimes as practitioners, right, like helping the patient to see, or even if they say, oh, I didn't have any wins this week, but as you talk to them, you're like, hey, that's a win. And
Mm-hmm.
like just being able to point it out to them and be like, you are having wins, right? And it's okay that we had this one challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And I love what you mentioned on like focusing on the non-scale victories.
Mm-hmm.
I think I want to stay here for a moment, right? Because more so specifically with women, right?
Mm-hmm.
That scale, oh my gosh, that scale is going to determine if we are doing well or if we're not.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about that, right? Like, how do you help your patients to look beyond that number?
Yeah, that's a great question because it is a challenge. And I think that, really how you can kind of reframe that and kind of put less emphasis on the scale is looking at so many. So, one big factor I would say, first and foremost, is I help my patients really track their body composition more than anything. So, really looking at, so if a person is weighing themselves, they can also see what's going on inside their body. So to be able to see how much muscle they have, how much water they have in the body, where is the body fat distributed, and all of those things to track that more specifically, because that's going to show some of the positive changes that may be happening along the way that might not right away reflect on the scale. So if they're, for example, gaining muscle mass and losing fat at the same time, then their weight may stay the same. So if they only saw that scale number, they might feel like nothing is happening. So that's just one example. But then also looking at, again, like one thing I often say to clients is that true weight loss, when we talk about true body fat loss, takes time, and it's not a linear process, and it's not necessarily going to happen every single week. There may be weeks that somebody may lose a couple of pounds, and then others where they don't lose at all, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing anything wrong, or that they're changing what they're doing. I think when we see it's going on for several weeks, then maybe they hit a plateau, then we'll reassess and take a closer look at what's happening. But sometimes there's changes in, depending on the time of menstrual cycle or a person's hydration status or stress. Like, there's so many factors that affect that. So I think really, when my clients understand all of those factors that come into play, it can make it a little bit more easier to understand that, that it's not just based on their habits, that these other factors sometimes may get in the way temporarily. But there's so many, again, reminding them of all the other things that are happening that are great, like possibly changes in body composition, changes in their mood, changes in their sleep, their energy levels, they're able to lift more, they're able to run longer. All of these things are amazing and really need to be emphasized. So to keep the person motivated, because, if we always focus, I always tell clients, if you focus just on the scale, and if the person is losing weight or not, then what happens when you meet your weight loss goal? What happens when you meet that, a body weight that you're trying to achieve? Do you stop, practicing those habits? And so we really want to focus more on how the person feels and all these other benefits that they're seeing along the way, so they continue and it becomes a lifelong practice.
Right. Yeah. Essentially understanding, right, or creating these sustainable changes, right, in habits that are going to go beyond the number on the scale, right, as you mentioned, focusing on the body composition, right, that we're losing body fat, right, and specifically for women, the number on the scale is going to change often, from week to week. You're starting your cycle, you're more bloated, you retain more water. So there's a lot of factors, right? And I think it's great that you work with your patients and helping them to understand what are the factors that are affecting the number on the scale, but also what are the other things, like the non-quantitative ways to measure progress, right? Like, you're feeling better, you're able to run more, you don't get as tired, right? You're sleeping better, because all these things are essentially going to continue to help with the weight loss. And that can also help with just having more compassion for themselves, right? And understanding,
Yes.
okay, this scale is not determining my progress, right? I'm still seeing these other changes. I'm still using the restroom better, right? Having better bowel movements. I'm able to better manage my stress, right? And cope with those quick changes. So yeah, that's great that you're also working with your clients on that too.
Absolutely. It makes a difference.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, are there any specific maybe affirmations, journaling prompts, or tools you recommend to reinforce self-kindness during setbacks?
Yeah, so I think that affirmations can be incredibly helpful. I think that, even just starting with kind of reframing those negative thoughts or those negative kind of statements that somebody's saying to themselves. So I can share a few examples of that, so that, I think when it comes to affirmations and positive statements like this, it's helpful to write them down. So I would encourage listeners to write these down, whatever ones seem to kind of resonate more with them. But a few examples. So instead of, having a negative statement such as, I ate too much today, I have no self-control, say something like, I ate more than I intended to, and I didn't really enjoy it. I'll remember this next time. Oh, I feel good. So kind of just bringing it back to how it made the person feel, not in a way that they're beating themselves up, or feeling bad about it, but really just kind of recognizing, why are they upset about it? And that it's okay that this happened. I'll remember this for next time, we writing it down. And then that's why tracking sometimes can be helpful. So you can kind of see, what worked and what doesn't work. And then they could feel good for the next time. So reminding themselves that they always have another opportunity to eat in a way that makes them feel good. Another example can be, instead of saying, I can't believe I binged again tonight, or I can't believe I overate again tonight, try saying, I'm noticing I'm eating a lot at night. Am I getting enough protein and fiber during the day to satisfy my hunger? Is there something I could do better, so that I'm not so ravenous at night? So kind of looking at it in a more sort of constructive way to see, okay, I'm noticing these habits happening. Instead of beating myself up, what can I do differently? What can I look back on and to see what might be causing it in the first place?
Yeah, I really like that. Like essentially getting into the root cause, right, of
Hmm.
these behaviors. Because sometimes we look at the superficial aspect of it, right? Like, oh, I'm bad, or I'm just, I'm out of control, or whatever the case may be.
Hmm.
There's always a root cause. Like there's something happening, right? And this is why these behaviors are happening. But being able to help our patients understand that, right? And see that, so they're like, okay, that makes sense, right? I've been more stressed this week, or, I talked to someone that made me upset. And so
Hmm.
that was really helpful. So with that in mind, right, how do you help clients navigate the emotional eating or guilt and shame cycle with compassion instead of like judgment?
Yeah. So emotional eating, I think, is very common. And I think it's important to first recognize that if you are struggling with this, you're definitely not the only one. And that it is, when we eat, we're not just eating. We're not just eating for fuel. There's a lot of emotions that go along with it, whether positive or negative. And so if my clients are struggling with this, you really just kind of try to get, again, going back to that root cause of what is leading to that, kind of taking that step back and evaluating what is leading to the emotional eating. Is it a certain emotion that's coming up? What is triggering that? And then trying to find better ways, more productive ways to cope with those emotions. And sometimes, it may be still eating something, but having a more nourishing version of that food, or maybe combining whether it's a sweet food with maybe some fresh fruit. So it's more balanced and it's going to improve their mood. Or it might be a non-food way of kind of managing that emotion, such as, if they're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, taking a quick break from work or whatever is stressing them out and going for a walk, just taking a few moments to find something that helps sort of reset them and gives them that same sort of de-stressed management that they're seeking. So that could be journaling, that could be, again, going for a walk, could be calling a friend. It could be just taking a few deep breaths and just stepping out of the room. And sometimes just taking that pause, I think, is probably one of the most helpful things that a person can do if they're struggling with emotional eating, and pausing and just kind of asking themselves, what do I need right now? And that can kind of be applied to a lot of situations, and then see, just have some of those, again, non-food sort of coping mechanisms to turn to if needed in that moment.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think that is so important to remember, right? That, and I oftentimes talk about this with my patients, right? Like we don't really learn, as we, obviously, if you have a parent that does that, right, with a
Mhm.
child, and they learn to do that. But oftentimes we don't learn how to deal with our emotions as we get older, right? If our parents didn't
Mhm.
go through that, we only know what we know. And so we almost find our own ways to deal and cope with our emotions, and either, if they're positive or not. And so if they're too overwhelming, right, sometimes we choose different things to help us manage those emotions.
Mhm.
Could be food, right? Could be something else. But our brains make those connections, right? And every time we feel that way, right, we're going to think about, oh, I ate that chocolate cake and it was so delicious and it made me feel better. And
Mhm.
so it's not so much that we don't have the control, right, over like we don't want to have that, but your brain has made that strong connection. And so
Mhm.
finding, like you mentioned, right, finding something that might replace it, right, or might build a new connection to, like, when we do feel sad, right, or we feel like really overwhelmed, pausing, right, or stepping away from it, or just taking a little break. And
Mhm.
then if we wanted that food after that, perfect, go out, go for it.
Right,
But
right,
at least,
exactly.
you're addressing the emotion, right? You're aware of it. You're like, okay, I'm feeling this way. And because historically I used to eat this food when I felt this way, right, and automatically think about it, or just it's subconscious, right? Like you
Right, it
just
becomes
do it.
habitual.
Right, exactly. And so I think that is important, right? That first of all, it's great that you work with your patients on like how to deal with that, right? And
Mhm.
giving them these tools that they need and they continue to use, right? Because they can use them anytime, not necessarily with food, right? But with anything
Right.
that they're going to go through, which is great.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's important even just to add on that, when it comes to kind of managing emotional eating and trying to slowly move away from it, and it's okay if it takes time too. I think recognizing that, if you develop these, new sort of strategies to manage it and it doesn't kind of work really well in the beginning. It might take some time. And that doesn't mean that it's not possible. I think when we have these, like you said, sort of more ingrained habits that every time, you feel a certain emotion, then maybe you have a certain mechanism that you cope with it with, then it's going to take a little bit of trial and error to find the best sort of replacement for that. And if it doesn't happen those first few times, or it feels hard those first few times, that's okay. If it feels a little bit hard or it feels a little bit uncomfortable, because that's just part of the process, and it will get easier, where you will replace over time with a new, more positive habit that then becomes your automatic coping mechanisms. It is possible. Again, practice that self-compassion, that if it feels challenging at first, or it feels that it's really hard to do in the beginning, that's completely normal, because if you have had that coping mechanism for a long time, it's it's just like any habit that we might have ingrained in us. It takes time to build those habits, and it takes time to break them as well.
Right. Yeah. Amazing. And remembering that, right? Like it's not
Mm-hmm.
going to happen overnight or a couple of weeks. It will take time, right? And that's
Sure.
okay.
That's
Right. We
okay.
can agree
Yeah.
with that. Definitely. What are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about self-compassion, like just in the wellness space or with the people that you work with or in your area of expertise?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think when it comes to the concept of self-compassion, I think that it's maybe like kind of over skewed to be something that's like, oh, I'm always positive all the time and happy, and that I'm not recognizing that there's sort of challenges along the way. And so I think that so then we want to reframe that to say that self-compassion is really just, again, just about kind of recognizing that we're human. It's really not saying that that we're not acknowledging mistakes, or we're not acknowledging challenges, but we're really just kind of being open and honest, and in recognizing that making mistakes or slip ups, or whatever we want to call them, they're part of the process. They're part of the process. Changing habits is a lifelong sort of endeavor. And even, for someone who has been practicing healthy habits for a long period of time, there's still days where they, might say, whether consciously or not, like, I don't want to do this today, or I just want to let loose and not worry about it. And that's okay too. It's just, I think that the real what self-compassion truly is that it's just giving yourself grace, and whenever a challenge comes your way, that you are recognizing it sooner and over time, so that you can kind of get right back to what is working for you, is going to work for you. And that reduces the potential self-sabotage that may come along with kind of beating yourself up over things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's not like, and this might be more for men, right? That they shouldn't also practice self-compassion, right? Because they're men,
Mm-hmm.
and society and all that. They're still
Yes.
human, right? We're still all human, and it's okay to feel your emotions, and it's okay to not want to do things, right? So even for
Mm-hmm.
myself, sometimes I don't want to do some things, and
Mm-hmm.
that's okay, right? We're giving ourselves permissions to.
Right. For sure. And I think, even like, just to add on, like, with the sort of misconception, is I feel like a lot of people may also think that self-compassion could be taken too far, potentially, like when it comes to like, oh, everything is, it's okay. I can, let this go for a while, and sort of move to the other side of maybe not caring or not trying to improve the healthy habits. And again, that's not really the concept of what it is. It's really just in those moments where things feel hard, or you feel like you made didn't go in the right path, the right direction, that you're just bringing yourself back. And again, it's bringing yourself back right away, not saying necessarily it's okay, I'm just going to kind of give up in that way.
Yeah, thank you for definitely making that different, defining that
Sure.
and having that difference too. How do you respond to someone who fears that self-compassion might lead to just like what we talked about, right? Complacency or just lack of discipline. Like they're afraid of like, well, if I give myself self-compassion, then I just not gonna care, right? I'm not gonna feel disciplined enough to do it.
Right, right. Like they're going to be too easy on themselves.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say that, it's definitely a fine balance. I think that it's always helpful to kind of bring that thought process back to what was their initial goal in the first place? Why did they, especially if they're coming to see, myself or you as a dietitian for for expertise, what was their initial goal, and kind of always bring yourself back to that, to kind of just ground yourself into, yes, you want to practice self-compassion, but the self-compassion could be helpful in just keeping you sort of motivated, and kind of tackling it in a positive way versus feeling like I have to be so restrictive or I have to do X, Y, and Z perfectly. The self-compassion really is, teaching them that it's more about just having that balance of, still enjoying it along the way, and still having some times where they can say, I really want this dessert, or I want this glass of wine, or whatever it is. And it's not going to make or break anything in the grand scheme of things. And I think, working together again on that, changing that mindset, that it's not them taking it too easy, but it's really just striking that balance of, how do they want to feel, and always reminding themselves of, why did they start this journey in the first place, and all the work that they've probably already done to get to that point that, nothing is worth giving up, on feeling your best.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing those thoughts, for sure.
Sure.
And assuring them, right, that it's okay, not because you're having some self-compassion, right, in the moments where you need them, that, you're just going to be complacent, right? You probably do need a little slowing down at times.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I also want to add, so in that too, I'm thinking of, and it's not quite self-compassion, but even just thinking about, an aspect of self-compassion in the context of weight loss can be that a person is allowing themselves to have that dessert, or allowing themselves to have something freely, which then, as may have alluded to, like, that can potentially lead to someone feeling like, well, when do I stop? Be like, where do I draw the line then? And this is something that some of my clients would ask, in terms of, like, almost like the concept of intuitive eating. Like, if I'm allowing myself and letting go of the guilt, am I going to be able to control the amount that I have? And so with that, I think it's going back to, always thinking about, like, what you truly want, and if you truly even want that food in the first place. A lot of times we might, want something just because it's there, or because everybody else is having it, versus, kind of choosing more wisely. And I think that's when it can be more of a balance, and choosing to have that, really good glass of wine, for example, if you're having, at your favorite restaurant, or having a dessert that you haven't had in a long time that you really enjoy, versus having it be more of a regular thing just because. And that's where it can become more of that overall balance of, practicing that self-compassion when it really matters to you, versus, feeling like it's, sort of like a free for all, and being nervous that, you go kind of on the other side, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And what comes to mind, as you are talking about that, is that sometimes clients, right, might feel like I cannot, the restriction, right? Like they're either don't have it at all, or if they have it, it's just out of control. And I think it comes with having these really restrictive behaviors, right? Or rules that they put themselves, like, okay, I'm never going to have that piece of dessert that I really, really enjoyed. And when you do have it, it's like, whoa, like a kid in a candy shop. There's no restriction there. And then we have these cycles, right? Of like, okay, now what have I done, right? So I think I love what you said about, like, just the addition of foods, like allowing yourself to have foods, right? And add in, instead of just restriction all the time, because we know what's going to happen. And that can be difficult for patients sometimes, when they feel like, well, I've struggled with that food all my life, right? So helping them understand, like, why, right? So maybe because it's so restrictive, right? Like, let's be less restrictive.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. It's really just kind of bringing them back to, like, no food is bad. No food is off limits unless you are allergic to that food. And so really, that it's, the more that a person is saying that food is bad, the more they eventually will want it, and that food has more power. So really kind of slowly weaving that, that food, or whatever it is, into the diet, to kind of like reduce its power over them, so that over time it becomes where it's not quite as big of a deal. And that is definitely possible to happen.
Yeah, amazing.
So, yeah.
What's one piece of advice you wish every person on a weight loss journey could hear?
Yeah, great question. So what I would say is, loss journey is just a lifelong process. And I did say, enjoy the process. It's not a race. And I know that's, sometimes definitely a big change in mindset for a lot of people, but I think the less pressure that you put on yourself to have like a timestamp on it, the more you enjoy the process of how you're feeling along the way. So I would say, kind of bottom line, just focus more on the habits rather than the weight loss itself. And then the weight loss will come.
Right. I love that. I love that a lot because in what's going to help you to maintain that long term, right, is the habits that you build. Not because like, oh, I lost these many pounds in these many months. Okay, but do you build the strong habits that are going to help you to maintain that weight off, right? Or is it just like, oh, I did something, a boot camp or whatever, for like 3 months and then I learned nothing, but I achieved my weight loss, right? And then we know what's going to happen, right? And so I think that's great to understand that it is a lifelong change and progress, right? But that's okay because you're building habits along the way.
Right.
And that's what is going to help in the end.
Right. Exactly. So I think even taking it in strides, in like small chunks too, if that helps. I often say with clients, like if I do see that they're putting a timestamp on things, then, it just feels so much more manageable. We say, let's just focus on the next couple of weeks and kind of slowly building these habits and you take it slowly over time. So it also feels less overwhelming. And then it's much more likely to stick when you think in that way.
Right. Yeah. Manageable because, you have other things that you have to do, not just, your weight loss journey, right? You have a million of other things that you have to do. So
of course.
Really nice. Melissa, thank you so much for joining me. Where can the listeners find you and learn more about your work?
Sure. Yes. So I'm on Instagram at theweightloss.dietitian. I'm also on LinkedIn, and they can also find me on my website, melissametri.com. It's MITRI.com. And I have a free downloadable handout that if anyone is interested, right on my website. And it's a healthy weight loss grocery list and guide.
Oh, I love that. I'll make sure to add all that information in the show notes. So if you're busy multitasking, just head over the show notes and you'll find all that information. Melissa, any final thoughts, anything else that you would like to share with the listeners?
Oh, I think it's really just, thinking positively. And if you feel that you had a tough day, then, get right back the next day. It's never too late to kind of get back to the habits that make you feel your best. So just practice that self-compassion and give yourself grace.
Yay. Awesome. But what a great way to end the podcast. So thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you everybody for joining. Stay healthy, stay strong, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you so much. Bye.
This podcast, the links and resources provided are for the purpose to educate only and are not a replacement for medical advice or nutrition therapy. I suggest you seek out the help of a trained professional to help you with your specific situation and needs.